The Pleasant Valley Bridge stretched across the Chicago River like a steel spine, its girders slick with November sleet. The windshield wipers on the 2008 F-150 fought a losing battle against the storm, each swipe revealing nothing but horizontal rain and the amber glow of sodium lights bleeding into the darkness. James Carter gripped the steering wheel, knuckles dark against cracked leather that had seen better decades, his mind 3 miles back at the garage and 40 blocks ahead at home. The radio crackled something about accumulation rates and wind chill advisories. He'd stopped listening somewhere around Ashland Avenue. His thoughts circled the kitchen counter instead, where the electric bill sat unopened because opening it wouldn't change the number inside. $247. Past due. The mortgage notice beneath it carried worse news. Final notice, stamped in red across $1,340 he didn't have.
6 days until the bank started making calls that turned into certified letters that turned into conversations about foreclosure timelines. Riley's volleyball tournament fee notice lived in that stack too. $300 might as well have been $3 million when grocery money came from skipping lunch 4 days a week. His younger daughter's asthma inhaler prescription waited at the pharmacy. Another $200 he'd been putting off for 6 days because Emma's breathing had been okay lately. Mostly okay. Good enough to risk another week. The headlights caught movement ahead. Wrong movement. A black Mercedes sedan, the kind that still smelled like money even in a downpour, fishtailed across wet pavement with the violent grace of something completely out of control. James's foot found the brake pedal on instinct, the old truck's anti-lock system chattering against his soul as the luxury car's taillights painted red streaks through the rain. 1 spin. 2. The Mercedes hit the bridge railing like a fist through wet cardboard. The sound wasn't right. Not the metallic crunch of action movies, but something wet and final and wrong. The car hung there for half a second, nose pointed at the black water 30 feet below, trunk still kissing the bridge deck. Gravity remembered its job. James's truck was already pulling to the shoulder before his conscious mind caught up. Hazard lights, engine killed. Cold air hit him like a fist when the door opened. November wind off the lake, carrying sleet that felt like gravel against his face. His work boots, steel-toed Red Wings with one lace held together by electrical tape, found slick pavement that wanted him on his back. The river churned below, swollen from 3 days of rain that had turned storm drains into fountains and low-lying streets into improvised canals. The Mercedes was sinking fast, headlights creating an eerie glow beneath the surface, like a drowning star, illumination fading even as he ran to the broken railing where twisted metal had already started to frost. Time did something strange then. Compressed. His daughters' faces appeared in his mind with perfect clarity. Riley with her mother's sharp eyes and that expression she wore when she knew he was lying about money. Maya with a gap-toothed smile that could make him forget about the stack of medical bills from Rebecca's final year at hospice. 4 years since cancer had taken his wife. 4 years of being both parents, both providers, both the strong one and the one who cried in the shower where the girls couldn't hear. 30 feet down, water temperature maybe 40 degrees. 90 seconds before hypothermia made his muscles useless. 3 minutes before permanent damage. Numbers from a CPR certification he'd taken 5 years ago at the factory, back when he'd had a job that required certifications instead of just calloused hands and the ability to diagnose transmission problems by sound. James jumped. The impact drove air from his lungs in a way that made drowning feel like a choice instead of an inevitability. Cold wasn't the right word for what the river did to him. This was something that reached inside his chest and tried to stop his heart mid-beat. The current grabbed him immediately, pulling downstream away from the sinking car with the mindless strength of moving water that didn't care about heroic intentions. He fought it, arms burning, legs kicking against the current's grip. The factory floor strength in his shoulders, earned from years of wrestling engine blocks and transmission assemblies, was the only thing keeping him from being swept into the black, where the river ran fastest under the bridge supports. Through the driver's window, illuminated by the car's dying interior lights, he saw her.
blonde hair floating in rising water like seaweed, hands pressed frantically against the door that wouldn't budge, water pressure holding it shut like a tomb. Her eyes found his through the glass. Blue eyes, terrified blue eyes, that looked at him not with hope, but with the terrible understanding that this was how it ended. His fist found the window. Once, pain shot up his forearm. Twice, knuckles split against safety glass designed to withstand impacts. The third punch, fueled by every overtime shift he'd ever worked, every moment he'd chosen to keep going when giving up would have been easier, spiderwebbed the glass. The fourth punch shattered it. Water poured into the car's interior, equalizing the pressure. James grabbed her by the shoulders of what felt like a very expensive suit jacket, the kind of fabric that cost more than his monthly grocery budget.
She was limp, unconscious, face pale as paper in the underwater gloom. He kicked hard, pulling her through the window frame, ignoring the glass that opened a line across his forearm hot enough to feel even through the cold. The surface seemed impossibly far away. His lungs screamed. The woman in his arms was dead weight, head lolling against his shoulder. 50 feet to shore. The current wanted them both under the bridge supports, into the concrete pilings where the river ran fastest and meanest and didn't give back what it took. Marcus kicked. Legs strong from years standing on factory floors, from running after two energetic girls, from refusing to let life beat him down. He found rhythm, stroke after stroke. The shore got closer by inches that felt like miles. His boot found mud, then his knee. He crawled the last 10 feet, dragging her onto the rocky bank, her body leaving a trail through sleet-covered ground.
Sirens wailed in the distance, but they might as well have been on another planet. She wasn't breathing. CPR training from 5 years ago came back in fragments. 30 compressions. His hands, rough and calloused from wrenches and engine parts, pressed against the sternum of a woman who probably made more in a month than he did in a year. 2 breaths. Her lips were blue. 30 more compressions. The words came out rough, his voice carrying that Southside Chicago rasp earned from 40 years of living in neighborhoods where respect was something you built, not something you inherited. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. Rain kept falling. His shoulders burned. Vision started to narrow at the edges. She coughed. Water spilled from her mouth and she turned her head, gasping, choking, alive. Her eyes opened, those blue eyes, and found his face. Recognition flickered there, though they'd never met, or maybe it was just the shock of being pulled back from wherever she'd been. Her hand found his arm, gripped it with surprising strength for someone who'd been dead 30 seconds ago. Her lips moved, but he couldn't hear over the sirens and the rain and the hammering of his own heart. Then she spoke, voice barely a whisper, threaded with something that sounded like wonder and exhaustion in equal measure. "Thank you." The ambulance arrived with a wash of red lights that turned the rain into crimson curtains. EMTs swarmed them both. Someone wrapped a blanket around his shoulders that did nothing against the cold that had settled into his bones. Someone else asked questions he couldn't process because his brain was still 3 feet underwater, wondering if he'd drown before reaching her. Through the crowd of first responders, he saw her being loaded onto a stretcher, oxygen mask covering her face. She was looking at him still, those eyes carrying questions he didn't understand, gratitude he didn't know what to do with. A paramedic checked his pupils with a flashlight that felt like needles. "Sir, you're hypothermic. We need to get you warmed up." "I'm fine." "Sir, I said I'm fine." James pulled away on legs that felt borrowed from someone else's body. His truck still sat on the bridge shoulder, hazards blinking their patient rhythm. The grocery bags on the passenger seat would be soaked through by now. Discount pasta, day-old bread, chocolate bars he'd hidden for Friday treats. All ruined. He'd have to go back to the store tomorrow, stretch the food budget even thinner to replace what the storm had claimed. He walked back to his truck on autopilot, got in, started the engine. In the rearview mirror, the ambulance pulled away, red lights disappearing into the storm that showed no signs of stopping. His phone buzzed in the cup holder. Riley's text appeared on the cracked screen. "Where are you? You said 6:30. The dashboard clock read 7:15. He typed back with fingers that barely worked.
"Sorry, kiddo. Traffic. Be home in 20. The lie tasted familiar. He'd been telling versions of it for 4 years, ever since Rebecca died, and he'd become the sole architect of his daughter's carefully constructed normal. The house on South Heritage Avenue had been home for 8 years, a small brick bungalow with a front porch that needed new boards and a fence that leaned slightly to the left like it was tired of standing straight. The neighborhood was working class, in the way that meant people knew their neighbors and minded their own business in equal measure. Street parking only meant circling the block twice before finding a spot 3 houses down. Inside, the smell of frozen pizza, Riley's specialty when he worked late, greeted him, along with warmth that felt like a physical embrace after the river. The living room held its careful arrangement of hand-me-down furniture and garage sale finds that Rebecca had somehow made look intentional, her presence living in the Afghan draped over the couch, in the photos on the mantel, in the way late afternoon light hit the window just so. Riley stood in the kitchen doorway, wearing her mother's expression of mild disappointment. 13, going on 30, in the way daughters did when they'd been forced to grow up too fast.
"You're soaked. It's raining. No kidding." She crossed her arms in a gesture so perfectly Rebecca that it hurt. "Emma already ate. She's doing homework." Marcus peeled off his wet jacket, wincing as the movement pulled at the cut on his forearm. He'd wrapped it with his handkerchief in the truck, but blood was seeping through. Riley's eyes went sharp. "What happened to your arm?"
"Nothing. Work thing."
"You work with cars, not razor blades."
She stepped closer, and he saw Rebecca even more clearly. The way she tilted her head when she knew he was lying. The set of her jaw that said she'd wait him out. "Just a cut, baby girl. I'll clean it up." From the back bedroom, Emma's voice carried that 9-year-old certainty that her father could fix anything.
"Dad, is that you?"
"Yeah, sunshine."
"I need help with number 7. It's about fractions."
"Give me 5 minutes to change, okay?"
"Okay."
He retreated to his bedroom, the one he'd shared with Rebecca, the one where he'd held her hand through those final terrible weeks when the cancer ate her from inside and modern medicine just made her comfortable while she died. Her perfume bottle still sat on the dresser, 3/4 empty. Some nights, when the loneliness got too heavy, he'd open it just to breathe her in. In the bathroom, he peeled off his soaked shirt. The cut on his forearm was shallow but angry-looking, edges ragged from broken glass. He cleaned it with peroxide from under the sink, watching foam turn pink. Then bandaged it with supplies that lived next to Rebecca's old prescription bottles he couldn't bring himself to throw away. His reflection showed a 40-year-old man who looked older. Lines around his eyes from squinting at engine schematics. Gray creeping into close-cropped hair. Shoulders still broad, but carrying burdens that had nothing to do with physical weight. The man in the mirror had once been an engineer, had worn a tie to work, had sat in meetings where people valued his opinion. That man had been laid off 6 years ago when Riverside Engineering downsized, had spent 3 months sending out resumes that went nowhere, had finally taken the mechanic job at Frank's shop because pride didn't pay for chemotherapy. Fresh clothes, jeans, and a faded Bulls sweatshirt. When he emerged, Riley was setting the table with the careful precision she brought to everything. Plates aligned just so, forks and knives in proper position, paper towels folded into triangles because they couldn't afford cloth napkins. Dinner was quiet. Emma chattered about her day, something about a boy named Brandon who ate paste, about her teacher, Mrs. Henderson, who let them have extra recess. Riley picked at her pizza in that way that meant something was on her mind. "Spit it out, Jazz." She looked up. The nickname from when she was 3 and couldn't pronounce her own name. "Coach says if I want to stay on varsity, I need to go to the tournament in Milwaukee next month. It's $300. $300. The same math he did every night, juggling which bills could wait and which couldn't. Electric company had already sent final notice. Bank had left 2 messages about the mortgage. 300 might as well have been 3 million. I'll figure it out.
Dad, it's okay if...
I said I'll figure it out. The words came out harder than he meant. Emma's smile dimmed. Riley's face closed off, walls going up. James hated himself a little. I'm sorry, long day. But we'll make it work, okay? You're the best middle blocker in the district. Coach wouldn't have asked if he didn't think you could make a difference. Riley nodded, but the light hadn't quite come back to her eyes. After dinner, she cleared dishes without being asked, another Rebecca trait, this need to be helpful, to carry more than her share. James helped Emma with fractions at the kitchen table, his mind only half present. The other half kept replaying those moments in the river, the weight of the woman in his arms, the terrible stillness of her face before she coughed back to life, the way her eyes had looked at him like she knew something he didn't. By 9, both girls were in bed. James sat in the living room with lights off, staring at the stack of bills on the coffee table. Electric, $247, past due. Mortgage, $1,340, due in 6 days. Medical bills from Rebecca's final hospital stay, $47,000 remaining after insurance, in collections, garnishing 10% of every paycheck. Car insurance, internet, groceries, Emma's asthma inhaler refill. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Creditors had his cell, and he was too tired to explain again that he was paying what he could. Something made him swipe to accept. Mr. Carter? A woman's voice, professional in that way that had been trained to sound warm while maintaining distance. Speaking. My name is Catherine Moore. I work for Elena Mitchell. I believe you pulled Ms. Mitchell from the Chicago River earlier this evening. The blonde woman. The Mercedes. Those blue eyes asking questions he still didn't understand. Is she okay? She's fine, thanks to you. Ms. Mitchell would like to thank you personally. Would you be available tomorrow morning, say 9 o'clock? James looked at the bills, looked at the mortgage statement with its red final notice stamp. I work at 9. Ms. Mitchell would like to make it worth your time. She's prepared to compensate you for taking the morning off. Something in his gut twisted uncomfortably. I don't need compensation. I'm glad she's okay. That's enough. A pause that felt calculated. Mr. Carter, Ms. Mitchell is quite insistent. She doesn't like to be in anyone's debt. Tell her she's not. He ended the call. Sleep didn't come easy that night. He lay in bed listening to the house settle, to distant sirens on Western Avenue, to the furnace kicking on with its familiar rattle. His mind kept circling back to the river, to the weight of her in his arms, to those eyes that had looked at him like maybe he mattered. Vose's picture on the nightstand watched him in the dark. 4 years, and he still reached for her sometimes in that moment between sleep and waking. Still forgot for half a second that the space beside him would be empty. He wondered what she'd think of tonight. Of him jumping into a freezing river for a stranger. She would have called him reckless and brave in the same breath, would have checked his pupils for signs of concussion, would have held him until the shaking stopped. The alarm went off at 5. Old habits from factory work when first shift started at 6, and being late meant losing the job you couldn't afford to lose. He made coffee in the ancient Mr. Coffee machine that had been a wedding present, its glass carafe cracked but still functional. The kitchen was quiet. This was his time, these early hours before the girls woke, when he could just exist without having to be strong or certain or enough. At 6, he started breakfast. Scrambled eggs. 4 eggs split 3 ways because a dozen had to last the week. Toast from day-old bread, margarine spread thin. Riley appeared at 6:30 already dressed for school, hair pulled back in a ponytail she'd learned to do herself from YouTube tutorials. You sleep okay, Dad? Like a baby. Another lie. They were getting easier. Emma stumbled out at 6:45, still in pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She climbed into her chair and put her head down on the table. Morning, sunshine. It's too early. It's the same time as every day. Every day is too early. He smiled despite the weight on his chest. These moments, Emma's grumpiness, Riley's careful competence, the simple rhythm of breakfast and backpacks and making sure everyone had what they needed. These were the anchors that kept him from drifting. At 7:30, he walked them to the bus stop 3 blocks away. The air was cold and sharp, promising snow before Thanksgiving.
Riley had her volleyball bag over one shoulder. Emma clutched her backpack decorated with unicorn stickers that were starting to peel. Other kids gathered at the corner, the Martinez twins, the Johnson boy, a few others whose names James knew because in this neighborhood, parents looked out for each other's kids. The bus arrived in a cloud of diesel exhaust. Riley turned before boarding. "You working late again?" "Regular shift today. I'll be home by 6. She studied his face, looking for the lie, then nodded. Emma waved from the bus window as it pulled away, her small hand pressed against glass already fogging from breath and body heat. James walked back through streets that had been home his whole life. He'd grown up 2 neighborhoods over in Englewood, back when it was still safe to play in the streets after dark. His mother had worked 3 jobs to keep him and his sister fed. His father had left when James was 7, that absence teaching him early that showing up was 90% of the battle. He'd promised himself his kids would have better. That promise had survived college at UIC on scholarships and loans, had survived landing an engineering job at Riverside Industries, sitting in meetings where people valued his opinion, had survived marrying Rebecca in a small ceremony at her parents' church. That promise had even survived the layoff, though it had been tested. What the promise hadn't survived was cancer. Hadn't survived watching Rebecca waste away. Hadn't survived the bills that came after. The realization that sometimes trying your hardest still wasn't enough. At the house, he changed into work clothes, Dickies coveralls with his name stitched over the breast pocket, steel-toed boots, thermal shirt against the cold. His work truck sat on the street, a 2012 F-150 that Frank had sold him for cheap when the transmission went out, and James had rebuilt it himself in the shop after hours. Frank's auto shop sat on Ashland Avenue, a squat brick building with 3 bays and a sign that hadn't been updated since 1987. Frank Kowalski had owned it for 40 years, had hired James when no one else would, had never once made him feel small for taking a mechanic's job when he had an engineering degree gathering dust in a frame at home. The shop smelled like oil and metal and coffee that had been on the burner too long. James clocked in at 8, grabbed his first work order, brake job on a Honda Civic, and got to work. His hands knew these rhythms. Jack the car, remove the wheels, inspect the rotors, replace the pads. Mechanical, predictable, honest work that left you dirty but didn't leave you wondering if you mattered. At 9:15, Frank appeared in the bay doorway, 65 years old, built like a fire hydrant with hands that could rebuild a carburetor blindfolded. "James, you got a visitor. Tell them I'm busy. I think you want to see this one." Something in Frank's voice made James look up. Through the bay door, parked in the lot where customers usually left their Toyotas and Chevys, sat 3 black Mercedes sedans, gleaming, new. The kind of cars that didn't come to Southside auto shops unless someone was very lost or very intentional. From the middle vehicle stepped a woman in a charcoal business suit that probably cost more than James's monthly rent. Blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun, blue eyes that he'd last seen terrified and drowning. Elena Mitchell walked into the shop like she owned it, not arrogant, just the kind of confidence that came from never having to wonder if you belonged somewhere. She stopped a few feet from his workstation, seemingly unbothered by the oil stains or the smell or the fact that he was holding a brake caliper and probably looked like he'd crawled out from under a car. "Mr. Carter." Her voice was different from last night, stronger, the voice of someone who ran things. "Ma'am?"
He set down the caliper, wiped his hands on a shop rag that was more grease than cloth. You doing okay? Thanks to you. She glanced around the shop, not judgmental, just taking it in. I tried calling last night. I know. I told your assistant I didn't need anything. And I told Catherine I don't like being in people's debt. She reached into her bag, pulled out an envelope. $20,000. A token of my appreciation. The number hit him like a fist. 20,000. That was the mortgage, the electric bill, Riley's tournament, Emma's inhaler, 6 months of breathing room. That was the weight on his chest getting just a little lighter. He didn't take the envelope. I appreciate it, but I can't accept that. Her expression didn't change. Why not? Because I didn't pull you out of that river for money. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Most people in your position wouldn't turn down $20,000. I'm not most people. Something flickered in her eyes. Not surprise, more like confirmation of something she'd already suspected. She put the envelope back in her bag. Then let me offer you something else. A job. James couldn't help it. He laughed, the sound rough in the mechanical quiet of the shop. Ma'am, I appreciate the thought, but I've got a job. You're wasting your talent here, Mr. Carter. I've done my research. That stopped him cold. Research. University of Illinois, mechanical engineering degree. 5 years at Riverside Engineering before they downsized. You designed the cooling system for their Model 7 hydraulic press. I read the patent application. The fact that she knew all this should have felt invasive. Instead, it just felt exhausting, like someone had dug up a past he'd buried for good reasons. That was a long time ago. 6 years, not a lifetime. Long enough. He picked up the caliper again, a clear signal that this conversation was over. She didn't leave. My father owned Riverside Engineering. Did you know that? James's hands stilled. Everything stilled. What? Daniel Mitchell. He sold the company 8 years ago to a private equity firm. They're the ones who laid off half the workforce, including you. My father would have handled things differently if he'd still been in charge. Why are you telling me this? Because I run Apex Medical Systems now. We develop medical equipment, specifically a portable dialysis machine called the Life Pulse. It's designed for use in underserved areas, rural communities, low-income neighborhoods, places where traditional dialysis centers don't exist or aren't accessible. She paused, and in that pause, James heard something shift. We're having filtration problems. The system's too complex, fails too often in the field. We need someone who understands practical engineering, not just theory. Someone who can look at a problem and see the simple solution. You have a whole company of engineers. I have a whole company of people who've never had to fix something with duct tape and ingenuity because there was no other option. You have. She gestured at the Honda on the lift. I can see it in how you work. You don't just replace parts, you understand systems. That's what I need. 20,000 he'd turned down. Now she was offering him a way back to the work he'd loved, the work he'd been good at before life had demanded he give it up, the thing that had made him feel like more than just hands and sweat and the ability to diagnose problems by sound. I can't. Why not? Because I have 2 daughters who depend on me. I can't risk a job that might not work out. The salary is $200,000 a year, full benefits, signing bonus of $50,000. She said it like she was reading a grocery list, like those numbers were real instead of fantasy money that people like him didn't get to have. You'd start as director of engineering for the Life Pulse project. If it works out, there's room for advancement. 200,000. The number was so far outside his reality, it didn't even register as real. That was every bill paid. That was Riley's tournament and college fund. That was Emma's medication without having to choose between groceries and prescriptions. That was breathing room he'd forgotten existed.
I don't have the qualifications you're looking for. You have exactly the qualifications I'm looking for. You just don't see it yet. She pulled a business card from her bag, set it on his workbench. Heavy cardstock, embossed letters that caught the fluorescent light. Think about it. Call me when you're ready. She turned to leave, heels clicking on concrete, then stopped. Mr. Carter, last night in the water, I was certain I was going to die. And then you appeared. You didn't hesitate, didn't calculate the risk or wonder if it was worth it. You just acted. Her blue eyes held his. That's the kind of person I need on my team. Someone who jumps when others would stand there doing math. After she left, James stood in the bay for a long time. The business card sat next to his socket wrench, impossible and real in equal measure. On the back, handwritten in precise script. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is believe we deserve better. E.M. Frank appeared again, coffee in hand. That was Elena Mitchell, CEO of Apex Medical Systems. Her company's worth about $2 billion. I know who she is. What'd she want? To offer me a job. Frank's eyebrows climbed toward his receding hairline. And? I don't know. James picked up the card, turned it over in fingers still grimy with brake dust and the evidence of honest work. On one side, professional credentials. On the other, a challenge written in ink that hadn't quite dried yet. You going to call her? Probably not. But he didn't throw the card away. He slipped it into his coveralls pocket, where it pressed against his chest like a question he wasn't ready to answer. The brake job needed finishing. The Honda's owner would be back at 5. Some things didn't change just because a billionaire walked into your life and offered you a different future. But the card stayed in his pocket through the rest of the shift, through lunch that was leftover pizza Riley had made, through an oil change and a transmission flush, and the careful work of keeping machinery running when replacement wasn't an option. It stayed there on the drive home, through dinner with his daughters, through helping Emma with her reading homework. That night, after both girls were asleep, James sat at the kitchen table with his 7-year-old Dell laptop that took 5 minutes to boot up. He looked up Apex Medical Systems. The website showed a sleek glass building in the West Loop, pictures of smiling employees, a mission statement about using technology to improve lives in underserved communities. He found articles about Elena Mitchell, 38 years old, took over the company 3 years ago when her father died. Harvard MBA, Forbes 30 under 30. A photo of her at some charity gala wearing an evening gown that probably cost more than his car, looking beautiful and untouchable, and nothing like the terrified woman he'd pulled from the river. He found information about the Life Pulse, portable dialysis machine, revolutionary design intended for deployment in areas without access to traditional medical facilities. Clinical trials showing promising results, but development delays, technical problems, filtration system failures. He could fix it. Sitting there in his kitchen, with bills stacked on one side and hope on the other, James knew with the certainty that came from 20 years of understanding how things worked that he could solve their filtration problem. It wasn't genius. It was just experience. When you couldn't afford to replace things, you learned to build them so they didn't break in the first place. But taking the job meant risk, meant leaving the certainty of Frank's shop for the unknown of a corporate environment he'd been away from for 6 years, meant believing he still had value beyond his ability to turn a wrench, meant believing that maybe, just maybe, he deserved better than barely scraping by. The business card sat on the table next to Riley's tournament fee notice. $300 that might as well have been $3 million. Or might as well have been nothing if he made $200,000 a year. His phone sat next to the card. He picked it up, put it down, picked it up again. Rebecca's sunflower clock on the wall, the one she'd bought at a garage sale and loved for reasons he never quite understood, ticked past midnight. He dialed. 3 rings. A professional voice answered,
bright despite the late hour. Apex Medical Systems, how may I direct your call? This is James Carter. Is Ms. Mitchell available? One moment, Mr. Carter. A click. Then her voice, not sleepy, like she'd been waiting. I was hoping you'd call. The job. I want to hear more about it. Can you come to my office tomorrow, say 2 o'clock? He thought about the work schedule, about the steady paycheck, about the safety of knowing exactly what each day would bring. Then he thought about Riley's face when he told her he couldn't afford the tournament, about Emma's sneakers with holes in the toes, about the stack of bills that never seemed to get smaller no matter how hard he worked. I'll be there. Good. A pause filled with things neither of them said. Mr. Carter, you won't regret this. After he hung up, James sat in the dark kitchen for a long time. Rebecca's picture on the fridge watched him with that smile that had always made him feel like he could handle anything. He wondered what she'd think of this decision, this leap into uncertainty. But he already knew. Rebecca had always been the brave one, the one who pushed him to dream bigger than the hand they'd been dealt. She would have told him to jump, just like he'd jumped into that river. The difference was, this time, he didn't know if he could swim. The Apex Medical Systems building rose 40 stories into the Chicago skyline, all glass and steel that caught the afternoon sun and threw it back like a challenge. James stood on the sidewalk outside, 2 o'clock on a Wednesday that felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. The suit he wore had been purchased for Rebecca's funeral 4 years ago, still smelling faintly of mothballs, despite yesterday's dry cleaning he couldn't afford but paid for anyway. The pants hung loose now. Grief and poverty both had their way of making a man thinner. Inside, marble and chrome conspired to make visitors feel appropriately insignificant. A security desk staffed by 2 guards in uniforms sharper than anything James owned. A wall of elevators with brushed steel doors that reflected a version of himself he barely recognized. He gave his name. The guard checked a tablet, nodded with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 10,000 times. 40th floor, Mr. Carter. Ms. Mitchell is expecting you. The elevator was empty except for him and his reflection in mirrored walls that showed every way the suit didn't fit right anymore. The tie, one of 3 he owned, was slightly crooked no matter how many times he adjusted it. He looked like exactly what he was, a man pretending to belong somewhere he didn't. The 40th floor opened onto a reception area that could have swallowed his entire house and asked for seconds. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, furniture that was more sculpture than function. A receptionist behind a desk made of wood so perfect it had to cost more than his truck. Mr. Carter, Miss Mitchell will see you now. Elena's office occupied a corner with windows on 2 sides, the Chicago River visible far below, like a gray ribbon through concrete canyons. She stood when he entered, came around her desk to shake his hand. Up close, without the terror of drowning in her eyes, she was striking in a way that felt almost aggressive. Everything precise, calculated, from the cut of her navy suit to the angle of her blonde hair pulled back in that same severe bun. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the opportunity. She gestured to a chair. He sat. She waited for him to settle before taking her own seat, a small gesture that felt significant somehow. Between them, her desk held a laptop, a slim leather portfolio, and a framed photo of an older man with kind eyes and graying temples. My father, Daniel Mitchell. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. It's been 3 years, but some days it feels like yesterday. She opened the portfolio with movements that suggested this had been rehearsed, or at least thought through carefully. Before we discuss the position, I want to be transparent about something. My father sold Riverside Engineering 8 years ago to Garrison Capital Partners. They're the ones who gutted the workforce, who valued short-term profits over people's livelihoods. If my father had known what they'd do, he never would have sold. He built that company on the principle that the people who worked there mattered more than the bottom line. James shifted in the chair that cost more than his monthly mortgage. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserved better than what happened. Because I want you to know that what I'm offering isn't charity or guilt. It's recognition of what you're capable of. She slid a folder across the desk. Inside were technical specifications, diagrams, photos of a machine about the size of a large suitcase. Sleek design, touchscreen interface, compact enough to be portable, but complex enough that James could see the problems before he even read the failure reports. The filtration system is the issue. We've gone through 4 iterations, and each one fails in field testing. Either the filters clog too quickly, or the cleaning mechanism malfunctions, or the power requirements are too high for areas with unreliable electricity. She leaned forward, and James caught something in her blue eyes. Frustration, maybe, or the exhaustion of fighting a battle nobody else understood. We've thrown some of the best minds in biomedical engineering at this problem. They keep making it more complex, adding more fail-safes, more redundancies. But complexity is the problem, not the solution. James studied the diagrams: dual chamber filtration, recirculation pumps, automated cleaning cycles triggered by pressure sensors. All beautifully designed, all wrong. You need a simpler approach. It wasn't a question. Elena's expression shifted into something that might have been a smile if she'd allowed it to reach her eyes. Go on. 2-stage filtration. 1 coarse filter to catch large particles. 1 fine filter for the actual dialysis. Skip the automated cleaning. Make the filters modular, easy to swap out in the field. Reduce the moving parts by half. That's what I thought when I first saw your work at Riverside. You see the elegant solution where others see the need for more engineering. It's not genius, it's just experience. When you can't afford to replace things, you learn to build them so they don't break in the first place. Which is exactly why I need you. She pulled another document from the portfolio, contract language, numbers that looked obscene in Times New Roman 12-point font. Director of Engineering, Life Pulse Division. 200,000 annual salary, 50,000 signing bonus. Full medical and dental for you and your daughters. 4 weeks paid vacation. Stock options that vest over 4 years. The numbers were real now, printed in black and white instead of spoken in auto shop air thick with the smell of brake fluid. James read the contract twice, looking for the catch. There had to be one. Nobody gave this kind of money to a man who spent his days under cars. When would you need me to start? 2 weeks. That gives you time to wrap up at your current position, get your daughter settled. We'll cover relocation assistance if you want to move closer to the office. I'm not relocating. My daughter's school, their friends, everything they know, it's on the south side. Then we'll make it work. The commute is manageable. She slid a pen across the desk, and in that moment, James saw the contract for what it was. Not just a job offer, but a test of whether he believed he deserved it. Riley's voice echoed in his head. What if you're not good enough? But so did Rebecca's, telling him to be brave, to jump. He signed on the line marked Employee. Elena's smile reached her eyes this time, transforming her face into something warmer, more human. Welcome to Apex Medical Systems, Mr. Carter. They shook hands again, and James felt the weight of what he'd just done settle over him like fresh snow. This was it. The moment everything changed. For better or worse, he'd just bet his daughter's future on his ability to be something more than a mechanic. Telling Frank was harder than signing the contract. The old man listened in silence, standing in the shop office with its ancient filing cabinets and a calendar from 1998 that nobody had bothered to replace. 200 grand, huh? Yes, sir. That's good money. Real good money. Frank pulled a rag from his pocket, wiped hands that were already clean, a nervous habit James had seen 100 times. You'd be stupid not to take it. I'm giving you 2 weeks' notice. I'll finish everything on my schedule, train whoever you bring in to replace me. Can't replace you, James. You're the best mechanic I've had in 40 years. Frank's eyes were wet, but his voice stayed steady, and that steadiness cost him something James could see. but you were never meant to be here long term. You got too much talent to waste it on brake jobs and oil changes. This place saved my life when nobody else would hire me. And you saved mine right back. Shop would have gone under 3 years ago if you hadn't rebuilt that lift motor when I couldn't afford a new one. Frank stuck out his hand, grip strong despite the arthritis that made winter mornings difficult. I'm proud of you, son.
Your wife would be too. That night, James called his daughters into the living room. They sat on the couch, Riley cross-legged with her phone face down beside her, Emma curled up with her stuffed rabbit, both watching him with varying degrees of suspicion. Serious family meetings usually meant bad news. I got a new job. Emma's face lit up with the kind of hope that made lying impossible. Does that mean we can get a puppy? No puppies. But it does mean some things are going to change. Good changes. He explained about Apex Medical Systems, about the Life Pulse project, about the salary that was more money than he'd ever made in his life. Riley's expression went from skeptical to calculating, running numbers in her head the way she did when checking his math on bills. How much more are we talking about? Enough that you don't have to worry about tournament fees anymore. Enough that Emma can get new shoes that actually fit.
Enough that we can maybe start putting money away for college.
Riley's voice went soft in that way that meant she was close to tears, but refused to let them fall. Dad, are you serious? Dead serious. Emma launched herself at him, rabbit and all, wrapping arms around his neck with the fierce intensity of 9-year-olds who still believed their father could fix anything. Does this mean I can do art camp this summer? Maybe. Let's see how things go first. But Riley stayed on the couch, face unreadable. James knew that look. She was working through the angles, trying to find the problem he wasn't telling them about. What's wrong, baby girl? Nothing. It's great. I'm happy for you. Her voice said otherwise. After Emma went to bed, James found Riley in her room, supposedly doing homework, but really just staring at her math textbook like it held answers to questions she couldn't articulate. He sat on the edge of her bed, mattress dipping under his weight. Talk to me.
It's stupid. Not if it's bothering you. She closed the textbook, and when she looked at him, her eyes held Rebecca's particular brand of fearless honesty. What if you're not good enough? What if they realize they made a mistake hiring you, and then you lose the job, and we're worse off than before? The fear in her voice was his fear, the one he'd been trying not to think about since signing that contract. Riley had learned too young that security was fragile, that good things could be taken away without warning. Cancer had taught her that. Poverty had reinforced it. That might happen. I can't promise it won't. He took her hand, and her fingers were Rebecca's fingers, long and elegant even at 13. But I can promise that even if it does, we'll figure it out. We always do. Because you always take care of us. Because we take care of each other. You, me, and Emma. That doesn't change no matter what job I have. She nodded, but the worry didn't leave her eyes. At 13, she'd already learned what 40-year-olds knew. The world didn't care about promises. It cared about what you could prove, day after day, until you couldn't prove it anymore. The first day at Apex started at 8 sharp. James wore his funeral suit again, this time with the navy tie Riley had picked out during a quick trip to Target, professional without being flashy. He left the house at 6:30 to beat traffic, arriving 40 minutes early and spending the extra time in his truck reviewing technical documents Elena had sent. The employee entrance was different from the main lobby, less impressive, more functional. He badged in with the temporary ID they'd issued, took the elevator to the 14th floor, where the engineering division lived. The open floor plan was all glass walls and standing desks, young engineers in jeans and hoodies clustered around monitors showing CAD models and simulation data. James felt ancient in his suit, like someone's father who'd wandered into the wrong building and couldn't find his way out. A woman in her mid-30s approached, hand extended, smile warm enough to cut through his anxiety. "James Carter? I'm Dr. Sarah Donovan, lead engineer on LifePulse. Elena said you'd be joining us today." Sarah wore jeans and an Apex polo, blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and when she shook his hand, her grip was firm, the confidence of someone who knew exactly how good she was at her job. "Let me show you around. Fair warning, we're a little chaotic, but the work is solid." She led him through the floor, introducing him to faces and names he'd never remember. Young engineers, most fresh out of elite programs, all brilliant and eager and slightly terrified of failure. The LifePulse project took up an entire corner, workstations surrounded by whiteboards covered in equations, prototypes in various states of assembly, a testing area with medical-grade simulation equipment. "This is your space." Sarah gestured to a standing desk near the windows, already equipped with dual monitors and a computer that probably cost more than everything in his house combined. "Elena wanted you to have natural light, said it helps with creative problem solving." "This is too much." "This is standard for directors. Wait until you see what the VPs get." She pulled over a chair, and James realized she was treating him like an equal, not like the mechanic who'd somehow conned his way into a corner office with a view. "So, Elena mentioned you have some ideas about the filtration system?" James looked at the latest prototype on the nearest workbench, elegant, complicated, doomed to fail in any environment that wasn't a climate-controlled laboratory.
"Can I be honest? Please. You're overthinking it, all of you. You're so focused on making it perfect that you've forgotten it needs to be practical." Sarah's smile didn't dim, and that alone told James she was worth keeping around. "That's the nicest way anyone's ever told me my life's work is garbage. I didn't say, no, you're right. We've been stuck in our own heads for months. Fresh perspective is exactly what we need." She handed him a tablet loaded with field test failure reports, 3 years of data showing the same patterns repeated with minor variations. "Read through these. See what patterns you find. We've got team stand-up at 10, and you can present your initial assessment." The reports painted a clear picture written in the language of systematic failure.
The filtration system was failing because it was too sensitive. Too many moving parts that could break. Too many sensors that could malfunction. Too much reliance on perfect conditions that didn't exist in rural Tennessee or inner-city Detroit or anywhere else the LifePulse was supposed to save lives. At 10, the team gathered in a conference room with glass walls overlooking the city. 12 engineers, all younger than James, all with degrees from places like MIT and Stanford and Carnegie Mellon. Sarah made introductions, and James felt their eyes on him. The old guy in the suit, the outsider who'd somehow landed a director position. Then Richard Thornton walked in. He was late, carrying coffee in a mug that said, "World's Best CFO," in ironic quotation marks. 55, white hair still thick, wearing a suit that cost more than James's truck. He took the seat at the head of the table like it was his by divine right, and when his eyes landed on James, something flickered there that looked like recognition, sharpening into contempt. Richard Thornton, Chief Financial Officer. His handshake was limp, dismissive, the physical equivalent of looking through someone instead of at them. "You're the new director?" "James Carter, yes, sir." Carter. That name's familiar. Richard's eyes narrowed with the focus of someone running calculations, accessing mental files that should have stayed closed. "Did you work at Riverside Engineering? 6, 7 years ago?" James's stomach dropped with the sickening certainty of watching a car crash in slow motion. "I did?" "Thought so. You were in the engineering department, part of the downsizing in 18. Richard smiled, and there was nothing friendly in it, just the casual cruelty of someone who'd never had to wonder if next month's mortgage would get paid. "Small world. Welcome back to the corporate sector, Mr. Carter. Try to last longer this time." The room went silent in that particular way that meant everyone had just witnessed something they'd pretend not to have seen.
Sarah's face flushed red. A young engineer named David studied his laptop like it might save him from the awkwardness settling over the conference table like toxic gas. The door opened and Elena walked in, wearing the same navy suit from yesterday, blonde hair perfect, blue eyes taking in the room with a kind of assessment that missed nothing. "Good morning, everyone. Sorry I'm late." She sat, and only then did James realize she'd positioned herself directly across from Richard, turning the conference table into a chessboard. "Actually, Richard, I was the one who signed off on those layoffs at Riverside." Her voice carried the temperature of a walk-in freezer. "So if anyone's responsible for Mr. Carter being here, it's me."
And I think you'll find his experience is exactly what this project needs. Richard's smile didn't waver, but something behind his eyes went sharp and dangerous. "Of course, Elena. I'm sure you know best." The meeting proceeded with painful professionalism. Sarah walked through latest test results. An engineer named Tom presented options for redesigning the pump system. Everyone carefully avoided looking at either James or Richard, the tension between the CFO and the new director thick enough to choke on. When Sarah called on him, James stood, feeling every eye track his movement to the front of the room. The problem isn't the filtration technology, it's the complexity. He pulled up the failure reports on the screen, 3 years of systematic defeat in PowerPoint slides. You've designed this for perfect conditions, clean power, trained operators, climate-controlled environments, but that's not where it's going to be used. He clicked to a photo from the field tests, a clinic in rural Mississippi. No backup generator, no air conditioning, July heat baking the walls. This is the reality. The tech who runs it is a nurse practitioner who learned dialysis from YouTube videos. She's brilliant and dedicated, but she's not an engineer. If something breaks, she can't fix it. He switched to the CAD model of the current design, 17 moving parts highlighted in red. Right now you have 17 moving parts in the filtration assembly alone. Each one is a potential failure point. What we need is a system that can be maintained by someone with basic tools and common sense. Richard leaned back in his chair, and James could feel the dismissal coming before the CFO opened his mouth. "Mr. Carter, with all due respect, you've been here for 4 hours. Our team has been working on this for 3 years. Which might be why you can't see the simple solution anymore." The silence was sharp enough to draw blood. Richard's eyes went cold in a way that promised consequences. But before he could respond, Elena spoke up, voice calm and implacable as glacial ice. "Go on, James. What's your proposal?" 2-stage filtration. 1 coarse filter, standard mesh. You can buy it at any medical supply company. Catches large particles. 1 fine filter handles the actual dialysis. Make both filters modular. When they clog, you pop them out, pop new ones in. No tools, no technical knowledge needed. The whole assembly has 3 moving parts total. Sarah was nodding, fingers already flying over her laptop, running calculations. That could work. The efficiency would be slightly lower, but the reliability gain would more than compensate. It won't work. Richard set down his coffee with a kind of precision that spoke to barely controlled anger. You're proposing we throw out 3 years of development and start over based on a mechanic's hunch. I'm proposing we build something that actually functions in the real world. The real world requires sophistication, Mr. Carter, not shade tree engineering. Heat rose in James's chest, the dismissiveness in Richard's voice, the casual contempt for anyone who'd gotten their hands dirty doing actual work. Every manager who'd ever looked down on him for fixing things instead of theorizing about them. Every suit who'd valued credentials over competence. But before he could respond, Elena stood, and the room went still. Thank you, James. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need. Sarah, I want you and James to work up a prototype of his design. Richard, I'll need cost projections on simplified manufacturing. She looked directly at the CFO, and there was steel in her blue eyes. This project succeeds because we're willing to challenge our assumptions.
That includes assumptions about who belongs in this room.
After the meeting, James found himself alone in his new office, staring at the city below while his hands shook with leftover adrenaline. The confrontation had been professional, controlled, but underneath it he'd felt something dangerous. Richard's anger, barely banked, and Elena's protection that might not extend past today if he failed to deliver. Sarah knocked on the glass door, stuck her head in. "For what it's worth, I think you're right about the filtration system." "Thanks. And Richard's an asshole to everyone, not just you." "That's supposed to make me feel better?" "Little bit, yeah." She came in, closed the door behind her, leaned against his desk in that casual way of someone comfortable in her own expertise. "Look, Elena doesn't hire people on a whim. If she brought you in, it's because she believes you can deliver. Don't let Richard's bullshit get in your head." "Too late for that." "Then let me give you some advice. Richard's been here since Elena's father ran the company. He thinks he's untouchable because Daniel trusted him, but Elena sees through him. She's just waiting for the right moment to move him out." Sarah pushed off the desk. "Your job isn't to fight Richard. It's to prove him wrong. Build the thing that works and let the results speak." After she left, James pulled up the CAD software and started sketching. The dual-stage design took shape on screen, simple, elegant, achievable. This was what he was good at. Not office politics or corporate maneuvering, just solving problems with tools and logic and the accumulated wisdom of making things work when failure meant people suffered. His phone buzzed. Riley's text appeared on the screen. "How's the first day?" "Complicated, but good." "How's school?" "Same. Emma forgot her lunch, so I shared mine." Of course she did. Riley taking care of everyone, just like her mother, carrying weight that should have been his to bear. He sent back a heart emoji, the most emotion he could manage through text, and got back to work. The next 3 days were a blur of CAD models and material specifications and meetings with suppliers who could provide the simpler components James's design required. Sarah proved invaluable, her engineering knowledge filling gaps in his own, her institutional knowledge helping him navigate Apex's bureaucracy. They built the first prototype in 72 hours. It sat on the workbench in the testing lab, looking almost crude compared to the sleek designs that had come before, but when they ran it through the simulation, testing it with blood substitute fluid, pushing it through cycles that mimicked months of use, it worked. Elena came down to see it on Friday afternoon, Richard trailing behind her like a shadow that wouldn't detach. "Talk me through it." James walked her through the system while Sarah pulled up data on her tablet. Coarse filter, fine filter, simple pump mechanism, no sensors to fail, no automated cleaning cycles to malfunction. If something broke, you could fix it with a screwdriver, and replacement parts that cost dollars instead of thousands. The test results. Sarah handed over the tablet, and Elena read in silence that felt like judgment hanging in the air. 96% filtration efficiency. That's only 2% below the complex design, but with a mean time between failures that's 30 times longer. Sarah's voice carried the quiet pride of someone who'd just solved an impossible problem. And the cost per unit drops from $45,000 to $18,000. Richard cleared his throat with a kind of precision that turned a bodily function into an accusation. $18,000 is still too expensive for the target market. These rural clinics you're so concerned about can't afford that. Elena didn't look at him, her attention still on the prototype with an intensity that made James wonder what she saw beyond plastic and metal. "Which is why we're partnering with state health departments and nonprofits to subsidize the cost. James, this is good work. How long until we can do field testing?" 2 weeks for manufacturing, another 2 for distribution and setup. We could have results by end of January. Make it happen. She turned to leave, then paused in that deliberate way that meant the next words had been chosen carefully. "Oh, and James, good job. Your instincts were right." After she left, Richard lingered like a bad smell that wouldn't air out. He walked slowly around the prototype, hands clasped behind his back, expression unreadable. "You think you've won something here?" James didn't respond. Some conversations were traps, and the only winning move was silence. Elena's brilliant, But she's young, idealistic. She thinks technology can save the world, that good intentions are enough. Richard stopped, looked directly at James with eyes that held calculations running just beneath the surface. But I've been in this business for 30 years. I know what happens to companies that chase humanitarian goals instead of profits. They fail. And when they do, everyone loses their job, including you. The Life Pulse can be both humanitarian and profitable. Because right now you've cut the profit margin to almost nothing. The board won't tolerate that indefinitely. Richard smiled, and it was the smile of someone who'd played this game before and knew all the outcomes. Enjoy your little victory, Mr. Carter. But remember, companies like Apex don't stay in business by being charitable. Eventually, reality catches up. He walked away, leaving James alone with the prototype and a creeping sense that the battle he'd just won was only the opening move in a much longer war. His phone buzzed, unknown number. James stared at it, finger hovering over the decline button, but something made him answer. Mr. Carter? A woman's voice, professional, unfamiliar, with a kind of practiced warmth that usually meant sales or scams. This is Detective Rachel Foster, Chicago Police Department. I'd like to speak with you about an incident involving your employer. The bottom dropped out of his stomach. What kind of incident? I'd prefer to discuss this in person. Can you come to the 18th District Station Monday afternoon? Say 2 o'clock? Am I being charged with something? Not at this time. We just have some questions. After she hung up, James sat in the testing lab for a long time, the prototype's quiet hum the only sound. The police. Questions. Not charged yet, but the word yet hung there like a guillotine blade waiting to drop. He called Elena. She answered on the first ring. The police want to talk to me. Don't go without a lawyer. I'll have Robert meet you at the station. I can't afford. The company will cover it. This is connected to Apex. You're not facing this alone. Elena, what's happening? But she'd already hung up, and James was left staring at his reflection in the darkened computer screen, seeing a man who'd jumped from one kind of uncertainty into something far more dangerous. The weekend crawled by with the particular agony of waiting for catastrophe. Riley noticed something was wrong, she always noticed, but James deflected with practiced ease. Emma chattered about school and her stuffed rabbit's latest adventures, oblivious to the storm building on the horizon. Monday morning arrived too fast. James dressed in his suit again, feeling like he was putting on armor that wouldn't protect against what was coming. The 18th District Station looked like every police station from every cop show he'd never wanted to be part of. Gray brick, American flag, the kind of institutional architecture designed to remind you of your place in the hierarchy. Robert Lawson was waiting outside, 50 years old in an expensive suit that screamed corporate attorney, the kind of lawyer who billed by the quarter hour and made sure you knew it. Don't volunteer information. Answer only what's asked. If I tell you to stop talking, stop talking. Inside, Detective Rachel Foster looked younger than James expected, maybe 42, with sharp eyes and the kind of tired that came from seeing too much. She led them to an interview room that was exactly like the TV shows. Gray walls, metal table, mirror that was probably one-way glass. She set a folder on the table, nodded at Robert. Mr. Lawson, thanks for joining us. Detective, what's this about? We received a complaint from Apex Medical Systems regarding potential theft of intellectual property. Specifically, allegations that Mr. Carter accessed confidential files and transmitted them to an outside party. The words hit like physical blows. Theft, intellectual property, outside party. Want to tell me your side, Mr. Carter? Robert leaned forward before James could speak. My client denies any wrongdoing. The evidence suggests his credentials were compromised by a third party. That's convenient. Foster opened the folder, pulled out a printed email. This was sent to our department's financial crimes unit this morning. Anonymous tip claiming Mr. Carter was working with a competitor called Meridian Biotech. The email included transaction records showing payments to an account in Mr. Carter's name. She slid a bank statement across the table, and James stared at it like it was written in a language he'd never learned.
Account opened 3 months ago at First Chicago Bank. The name on it was Marcus Carter. Wrong first name, but his last name, his address on South Heritage Avenue. Over the past 2 weeks, deposits totaling $75,000 from Meridian Biotech Corporation. That's a lie. Is it? Foster pulled out another document. This account was opened October 15th. You were hired at Apex 2 weeks ago. The timing is suspicious, Mr. Carter. Someone's framing me. That's what everyone says. Robert's voice cut through with the precision of a scalpel. Do you have any evidence linking my client to the creation of this account? We're working on it, but the timing is problematic. You're a mechanic who suddenly gets hired as a director at a major tech company. Within 2 weeks, proprietary data gets stolen from your account. An offshore account in your name starts receiving payments from a competitor? Foster leaned back, and James saw the calculation in her eyes, the math she was doing that added up to guilt. From where I'm sitting, that looks like industrial espionage. Suspicion isn't evidence. Unless you're charging Mr. Carter, we're done here. Foster studied James for a long moment, and he forced himself to meet her gaze, even though everything in him wanted to look away, to run, to be anywhere but this gray room with its implications of federal prison and daughters growing up without their father. I'm not charging you yet, but I will be investigating. Don't leave town, Mr. Carter. And if you're smart, you'll cooperate with us rather than your employer. Outside the station, James leaned against his truck, hands shaking in a way that had nothing to do with cold. Robert stood nearby, already on his phone, voice clipped and professional. This is bad. Whoever's setting you up isn't messing around. They've created a paper trail that points directly at you. Can you prove the account's fake? We can try, but banks don't just hand over records without court orders, and court orders take time. Robert ended his call, and when he looked at James, there was something in his expression that might have been sympathy if lawyers allowed themselves such unprofessional emotions. In the meantime, you need to lay low. Don't do anything that could be interpreted as suspicious. Like what? Breathing? Like having contact with anyone from Meridian? Like accessing files you shouldn't? Like... He paused, and the pause felt significant. You have kids, right? 2 daughters. Then think about them. Because if this goes sideways, you could be looking at federal charges, wire fraud, theft of trade secrets, conspiracy. That's 20 years minimum. 20 years. Riley would be 33. Emma would be 29. He'd miss everything. Graduations, weddings, grandchildren. His daughters would grow up visiting their father in prison, and the promise he'd made to Rebecca, to give them better, would be broken in the worst possible way. That night, Riley found him sitting at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. Dad? He looked up, and she must have seen something in his face because hers went pale. What's wrong? Work stuff. I'm handling it. You're lying. She sat across from him, 13 years old but carrying Rebecca's particular brand of fearless honesty. Someone's trying to make it look like I did something wrong at work. The police are investigating. Things might get complicated. Riley's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Are they going to arrest you? I don't know, baby girl. I hope not. But you didn't do anything wrong. No. But sometimes that doesn't matter. His phone buzzed at 2 a.m. Dr. Sarah Donovan, voice shaking in a way that turned his blood to ice. Someone broke into my apartment. Are you okay? Physically, yes. But James, they tore the place apart. Took my laptop, my work tablet, all my backup drives. Did you call the police? They came, took a report, said it was probably a burglary. But Marcus, her voice cracked. They only took the electronics. Left my jewelry, my TV, everything else. This wasn't random. Someone wanted my research. Where are you now? Hotel on North Avenue. I'm scared. Whoever did this, they know where I live. They know I've been helping you. Pack a bag. I'm coming to get you. James, you can't. You're already... I helped you when nobody else would. I'm not leaving you alone. 20 minutes later, he was loading her duffel bag into his truck, Sarah looking over her shoulder like every shadow held threats. Riley was awake when they got back to the house, standing in the hallway in her pajamas. Who's that? A friend from work. She's staying with us for a few days. Riley's eyes were too knowing, seeing through the lie to the fear underneath. We're in trouble, aren't we? We're handling it. Go back to bed. But she stood there, and James saw Rebecca in her stance, that refusal to be sheltered from hard truths. We take care of each other, right, Dad? Always. Sarah worked through the night on her laptop, the only device the burglars hadn't taken, diving into server logs with the kind of focus that came from anger transmuted into action. James made coffee at 4, brought it to her at the kitchen table where diagrams and code filled her screen. I found it. Her voice carried exhaustion and triumph in equal measure. The breach came from a coffee shop on Michigan Avenue. Public Wi-Fi, no security cameras inside. But James, she turned the laptop toward him. Your phone shows 2-factor authentication at the exact time of the breach. And cell tower data proves you were on the south side. You can't be in 2 places at once.
Someone cloned my credentials. Exactly. This proves you didn't do it. But proving it in a way that satisfies a judge? That's harder. She forwarded everything to Elena, and James watched the sun rise over his neighborhood, wondering how many more sunrises he'd see before the walls closed in completely. His phone rang at noon. Unknown number, but James was past caring about caution. Mr. Carter, this is Morgan Wells, Chicago Tribune. I'm doing a story on Apex Medical Systems and their Life Pulse project. Can we meet? I can't comment on company business. This isn't about the project. It's about you. Specifically about Richard Thornton and what he's doing to you. James's grip tightened on the phone. How do you... I'm a reporter. It's my job to know things. Mavie Pier, 1 o'clock, food court by the Ferris wheel. Come alone or I walk. The pier was mostly empty on a Monday afternoon in November. Just a few tourists braving the cold and some retirees who had nowhere better to be. Morgan Wells appeared at exactly 1:32, red hair, dressed like every other tourist in jeans and a North Face jacket. She sat across from him without preamble. I've been investigating Meridian Biotech for 6 months. They have a history of acquiring technology through questionable means, corporate espionage, bribery, intimidation, and I have documents linking Richard Thornton to their CEO. She pulled a flash drive from her pocket, set it on the table between them. This contains emails between Richard and Robert Vance, CEO of Meridian. They've been in contact for 8 months. The emails discuss payment schedules, data deliverables, timelines for removing obstacles from the Life Pulse project. James stared at the flash drive like it might explode. Where did you get these? I have a source inside Meridian, someone who's tired of working for criminals. She slid the drive toward him. There's also evidence of the fake bank account. Meridian set it up, made the deposits in your name, then tipped off the police. They wanted you arrested, removed from the Life Pulse project. Why would Meridian care about me specifically? Because your filtration design works. The simple, elegant solution that makes the Life Pulse viable. Meridian spent 5 years and $20 million trying to solve the same problem and failed. When word got out that some mechanic from the South Side cracked it in a week, they panicked. James picked up the flash drive, and it felt heavier than something so small should feel. Heavy with evidence, with hope.
with the possibility of proving his innocence. Why give this to me instead of publishing it? I will publish it, but I need you to testify, to go on record about what happened. A reporter's investigation only goes so far.
A victim's testimony? That's a story people remember. And if I refuse? Morgan's eyes were steady, and James saw the calculation there, the story she'd write either way, with him or without him. Then Meridian wins. Richard walks away rich, and you spend the next decade fighting charges you can't beat. After she left, James sat with the flash drive in his hand, weighing options that all felt like different flavors of disaster. He could take this to Elena, let her lawyers build a case. He could take it to the police, hope they'd listen. Or he could do nothing, let the system grind him down, and pray his daughters would understand why their father gave up. His phone buzzed. Text from Riley. Emma's asking when you'll be home. I told her soon. Please let that be true. He stood, pocketed the flash drive, and headed for the parking garage. On the way out, he passed a mother with a young daughter, maybe Emma's age, both laughing at something on the girl's phone. The kind of normal moment his daughters deserved, and weren't getting because their father had dared to reach for something better. The drive back to the south side took forever in traffic that felt personal. His mind churned through scenarios, none of them good. If he used Morgan's evidence, he'd be going to war with Meridian and Richard both. If he didn't, he'd lose everything anyway, just slower, with more humiliation. At home, Sarah met him at the door. We have a problem. Someone called the house phone, asked for you by name. When I said you weren't available, they hung up. Could be anyone. Caller ID said Meridian Corporation. The walls were closing in, and James could feel them pressing against his ribs, making it hard to breathe. They knew where he lived. They were making sure he knew they knew. The threat was implicit, but clear as broken glass. His phone rang again. Elena this time, and he'd never heard her voice this tight. James, where are you? Home. Why? The police just served a warrant. They're searching your workspace at Apex. They have evidence, real or fabricated, I don't know, linking you to the data breach. You need to get ahead of this. Whatever proof you have of your innocence, you need to produce it now. He told her about the flash drive, about Morgan's information. Elena went quiet for long enough that James thought the call had dropped. That's either our salvation or another trap. Send me the files. I'll have Robert review them before we make any moves. Elena, if this is real, if we can prove Meridian and Richard are working together, then we have a chance. But James, you need to understand. Even if we prove you're innocent, the damage is done. The board sees you as a liability. Your continued employment here is... She stopped herself, but the unspoken words hung there anyway. I know. I'm radioactive. The mechanic who thought he could play with the big boys. That's not what I think, but it's what they think, and their votes matter. A pause filled with things neither of them could say. There might be another way. If we can prove Richard's embezzlement beyond doubt, if we can show the board that keeping him is more dangerous than keeping you, you're talking about a corporate war. I'm talking about survival, mine and yours. After he hung up, James sat with his head in his hands. Rebecca's picture on the fridge seemed to judge him. This wasn't what they'd planned. This wasn't the future they'd imagined when they'd scraped together a down payment on this little house, when they'd painted Emma's nursery together, when they'd promised each other their kids would have it better. Riley appeared in the doorway, silent as a ghost, and when he looked up, her face held Rebecca's expression, that particular combination of fear and determination. Dad, I'm scared. He opened his arms and she came to him, 13 years old but still small enough to fit against his chest, and he held her while she shook. I'm going to fix this. How? I don't know yet, but I promise you, whatever happens, you and Emma come first. Always. What if they arrest you? The question he'd been avoiding,
The nightmare that woke him at 3 in the morning. Then your Aunt Michelle will take care of you until I get out. And if you don't get out? Riley pulled back, and her eyes held tears she refused to let fall. Then you remember that your father loved you more than anything in this world, and you take care of your sister, and you don't let this break you. She was crying now, silently, the way Rebecca used to cry when she thought he couldn't see, and James held her until the shaking stopped, until she pulled away and wiped her face with her sleeve. I hate them. Whoever's doing this to you. Yeah. Me too. That night, after both girls were finally asleep, James sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and the flash drive Morgan had given him. The emails were damning. Richard and Robert Vance discussing payment schedules, data deliverables, timelines for removing obstacles. One email made his blood run cold. The engineer is becoming a problem. His design actually works, which complicates our timeline. Recommend accelerating phase 2, full discreditation and removal. The family angle provides useful leverage if needed. The family angle. They were talking about Riley and Emma, about using his daughters to pressure him into silence or compliance or whatever would make him go away quietly. James forwarded everything to Elena, then copied the files to 3 separate locations, his laptop, a cloud drive, and a thumb drive he'd hide somewhere safe. If this was going to be war, he needed insurance. His phone buzzed at 11. Elena's name on the screen. I've reviewed the files. This is enough to bury Richard and make a strong case against Meridian, but using it means going public. Morgan will publish, the SEC will investigate. This becomes headline news. I'm already headline news. Might as well make it count. There's a cost to this path, James. Your name gets dragged through the mud publicly before it gets cleared. Your daughters will see their father accused of crimes on the evening news. You'll be unemployable at most companies because even when you're exonerated, the stink doesn't wash off completely. What's the alternative? We bury it. Use the evidence privately to force Richard out. Negotiate a settlement with Meridian. You resign from Apex with a severance package that keeps you and your girls comfortable. The life pulse continues under new leadership. Everyone moves on. It was the smart choice, the safe choice. Take the money, protect his family, disappear back into obscurity where mechanics belonged. But Riley's voice echoed in his head. We take care of each other. And Elena's words from that first meeting. You just acted. That's the kind of person I need. No, we go public. We burn it all down if we have to. The certainty in his own voice surprised him, because if we don't, men like Richard keep winning, and I won't teach my daughters that surrender is how you survive. Elena was quiet for a long moment, and James wondered if he'd just ended his career and destroyed his one chance at proving his innocence. Okay, then we fight. Morgan publishes tomorrow. I'll prepare a statement for the board. And James, thank you for being willing to bleed for this. Just make sure the bleeding means something. After he hung up, James checked the locks on every door and window. In Emma's room, his youngest slept with her rabbit tucked under her chin, innocent and unaware of the storm about to break. In Riley's room, his eldest was awake, scrolling through her phone in the dark. Couldn't sleep either? She jumped, then relaxed when she saw him. Just thinking. About what? About Mom. What she'd say about all this. James sat on the edge of her bed. What do you think she'd say? That you're being stubborn and brave and kind of stupid. But she'd be proud anyway. Riley set down her phone. She always said you were the strongest person she knew. Not because you never broke, but because you always got back up. Your mom was smarter than both of us combined. So what now? Now we fight. Tomorrow a reporter is going to publish a story about what's really happening at my company. It's going to be bad for a while. People will say terrible things about me. But eventually, the truth will come out. And we'll be okay? We'll be better than okay.
We'll be free. Riley nodded, processing, and James saw Rebecca in her face, that same fierce determination to face hard truths without flinching. Dad, when this is over, can we get a dog? The question was so unexpected, so perfectly normal, that James almost laughed. Yeah, when this is over, we can get a dog. He kissed her forehead and left her to sleep, knowing she wouldn't, knowing she'd lie there running scenarios the same way he would. Outside, a car drove slowly past the house, dark sedan, tinted windows, slowing at his driveway before continuing down the block. James watched it disappear, then double-checked every lock. At midnight, his phone buzzed. Unknown number, but this time it was a text, not a call. Last chance. Take the settlement, or your daughters pay. James stared at the message, hands shaking with rage instead of fear now. They'd crossed the line. Whatever corporate espionage game Richard and Meridian were playing, threatening his children ended any possibility of negotiation. He texted Elena. They just threatened my girls. Her response came back immediately. Then we end this, tomorrow.
James sat in the dark kitchen, Rebecca's picture on the fridge, watching him with that smile that had always made him believe he could handle anything. Tomorrow the war started in earnest. Tonight he stood guard over the two people who mattered more than any job, any reputation, any future that didn't include them whole and safe. The war was coming, but for now, his daughters slept, and that was victory enough. The Chicago Tribune hit newsstands at 6 in the morning, but the digital version appeared 30 minutes earlier, spreading across social media like wildfire through dry grass. Elena read Morgan Wells's article on her phone while the city still slept, standing at her 40th floor window, watching dawn turn the river from black to gunmetal gray. The headline was surgical. Apex Medical CFO accused of embezzlement, corporate espionage, and scheme to destroy rival technology. Morgan had done her work well. Every email between Richard and Robert Vance laid bare.
The fake bank account in James's name traced back to Meridian shell companies. The timeline of bribes and data theft stretching back 8 months. Sarah Donovan's apartment break-in connected to Meridian security contractors through credit card receipts and phone records. By 7, Elena's phone was ringing off the hook. Board members demanding emergency meetings. Shareholders wanting statements. Richard's attorney issuing denials that read like confessions wrapped in legalese. The PR department in full crisis mode. By 8, hashtag Justice for James Carter was trending nationally. Margaret Bradshaw called at 8:15, her voice carrying the particular frost of someone whose authority had just been publicly undermined. Emergency board meeting, 9 o'clock. Your office. I'll be ready. Elena, I hope you know what you're doing. If this blows up, it's your head on the chopping block. Noted. She hung up and called James. How are your daughters? Scared. I kept them home from school. There are reporters outside the house. I'm sending security. 2 officers will stay with you until this is resolved. Non-negotiable. Elena, your girl's safety comes first. Everything else is secondary. She ended the call before he could argue, then spent the next 45 minutes preparing for a battle she'd been planning since the day her father died. The evidence was organized in folders, financial records, email transcripts, witness statements from Sarah and James, Morgan's investigative timeline. Everything Richard had done, every crime he'd committed, laid out with the precision of a prosecutor building a case. The board members arrived at 9 sharp. Margaret Bradshaw in her power suit and pearls, looking like she'd aged 5 years overnight. Robert Lawson with his legal pad and the expression of someone calculating billable hours. 3 other board members whose faces Elena had memorized, but whose loyalty remained uncertain. Richard walked in last, flanked by his own attorneys, 2 sharks in expensive suits who'd made careers defending the indefensible. This is a witch hunt. Richard's voice carried the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences, who believed his 20 years of service made him untouchable. I'm being railroaded by a CEO who's out of her depth and a mechanic with delusions of grandeur.
Elena let him talk. She'd learned from her father that the best way to defeat someone was to let them hang themselves with their own rope. Margaret called the meeting to order with the efficiency of someone who'd been chairing boards since before Elena was born. We're here to address serious allegations against our CFO and equally serious counter-allegations regarding our newest director. Ms. Mitchell, you called this meeting. Present your case.
Elena stood, and the movement felt like stepping onto a battlefield where the outcome would determine not just her career, but whether her father's principles could survive in a world built on quarterly earnings.
3 years ago, my father died in a car accident. The police ruled it accidental. I've never believed that. She clicked the presentation remote, and the first slide appeared, her father's crash site, twisted metal against a guardrail on a mountain road. 2 weeks before he died, my father discovered financial irregularities at Apex. Millions of dollars unaccounted for. He was going to bring in auditors, go public if necessary. Then he died, and the investigation died with him. Richard's attorney leaned forward.
Ms. Mitchell, are you accusing my client of murder? Because that's a serious...
I'm accusing your client of embezzlement. The murder investigation is ongoing with the FBI. She clicked to the next slide.
Wire transfer records. $3 million siphoned to Cayman accounts over 18 months. Richard has been stealing from this company since my father's death. When James Carter's filtration design threatened to make the Life Pulse profitable, when success would bring audits and scrutiny, Richard panicked. Click. Emails between Richard and Robert Vance discussing payment schedules and data deliverables. He partnered with Meridian Biotech, our competitor, sold them our research, then framed James Carter for the crime to eliminate the threat and provide a convenient scapegoat. Margaret's expression hadn't changed, but her knuckles were white against the table edge. These are serious accusations. What proof do you have beyond stolen emails and circumstantial evidence? The door opened. Dr. Sarah Donovan walked in carrying a laptop, her professional composure barely masking the anger underneath. I have proof, and I'm willing to testify under oath. Sarah set the laptop on the conference table, pulled up screen after screen of server logs and authentication records. Richard accessed James Carter's credentials using keylogger malware, planted the day after James was hired. The remote breach came from Richard's personal laptop. I pulled the MAC address from our backup servers. It's irrefutable. She turned to Richard, and her voice carried the weight of someone who'd watched a good man get destroyed for telling the truth. You framed an innocent person. You stole 3 years of my work. You had my apartment broken into by thugs who threatened me in my own home. Richard stood, and the careful mask he'd worn for 3 years finally cracked. This is conspiracy. Elena and her pet mechanic have fabricated evidence to cover their own incompetence. Then explain the Cayman account. Elena's voice cut through his bluster like a blade through silk. Explain the wire transfers. Explain why Meridian paid $75,000 into a fake account with James's name on it. I've given 20 years to this company. I built this with Daniel. You ungrateful. You stole from my father. And when he found out, you had him killed. The room went silent. Richard's face turned the color of old paper. You have no proof of that. Not yet. But the FBI is investigating. They've reopened the crash case based on evidence I provided 6 months ago. Your financial crimes gave them probable cause. Margaret stood, and the movement carried the finality of a gavel strike. Security. Remove Mr. Thornton from the premises. Effective immediately, he is terminated for cause and barred from company property pending criminal investigation. Richard's attorneys tried to argue, but Margaret's look could have frozen nitrogen. Unless you'd like to be investigated for obstruction, I suggest you advise your client to cooperate. 2 security guards appeared. Richard looked around the room, seeing no allies, no escape route, just the culmination of 3 years of lies collapsing under the weight of documented truth. This isn't over. Yes, it is. Elena remained standing as they escorted Richard out, and she felt the weight of 3 years lift off her shoulders,
The rage she'd carried since her father's death. The fear that she'd never be able to prove what she knew in her bones. The terrible possibility that men like Richard won because people like her gave up too easily. FBI agents were waiting in the lobby. Elena watched through her office window as they put Richard in handcuffs, the perp walk captured by a dozen news cameras that had materialized like vultures sensing carrion. The Chicago Tribune photographer got the shot that would run on tomorrow's front page. Richard Thornton, former CFO of a $2 billion company, hands behind his back, face twisted with impotent fury.
Margaret remained after the other board members left, standing at the window beside Elena. Your father would be proud. Would he? I used people, Margaret. I brought James in knowing Richard would feel threatened. I put a good man in danger to prove a point. You brought James in because he's brilliant. What Richard did? That's on Richard, not you. The older woman's reflection in the glass looked tired, and Elena realized for the first time that Margaret had known, had suspected, had been waiting for Elena to build a case strong enough to act on. The board is voting this afternoon on your continued tenure as CEO. It'll pass unanimously. You've proven yourself, Elena, not just as your father's daughter, but as a leader in your own right. After Margaret left, Elena sat alone in her office and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to fall apart. 3 years of holding herself together, of playing corporate chess while grieving her father, of becoming someone she wasn't sure she liked in order to defeat someone she knew was evil. The tears came fast and silent, and when they stopped, she wiped her face and got back to work. James called at noon. I saw the news. Richard's been arrested. Wire fraud, theft of trade secrets, conspiracy. The embezzlement charges are federal. He's looking at 15 years minimum. Elena, I need to ask you something. His voice carried a weight she couldn't identify over the phone. Did you know? When you hired me, did you know Richard would come after me? The question she'd been dreading since the moment she'd walked into Frank's auto shop. I knew he'd feel threatened by you, by your competence, by the fact that you couldn't be bought or intimidated. I didn't know he'd go this far. Silence on the line, and Elena held her breath, waiting for judgment. I need to think about that. Take all the time you need. After he hung up, Elena stared at her phone and wondered if proving her father's killer guilty meant destroying the one person who'd reminded her what integrity looked like. Detective Rachel Foster called at 2 to inform her that the charges against James had been dropped, the fake account closed, his name cleared in the public record. The vindication felt hollow when Elena didn't know if James would still be there to receive it. She worked until 7, then drove to the South Side. She'd been there once before, the day she'd offered James the job, but this time she parked on South Heritage Avenue in front of a small brick bungalow with a porch that needed work and a fence that leaned left. James opened the door before she could knock. Your security guys told me you were coming. Can we talk? He stepped aside, led her into a living room that was small and worn and filled with the kind of love that expensive furniture couldn't buy. Photos on the mantel showed a beautiful woman with kind eyes, Rebecca, Elena guessed, and 2 girls growing up in captured moments. Coffee? Please. They sat at a kitchen table that had seen better decades, mugs between them like a demilitarized zone. I owe you an apology. James's fingers tightened on his mug. When I hired you, I had 2 reasons. The first was genuine. You're brilliant, and the Life Pulse needed exactly the kind of practical innovation you bring. The second was strategic. I knew Richard would see you as a threat, and I needed him off balance. So you used me. I gave you an opportunity you'd earned. What Richard did, framing you, threatening your daughters, that's on him, not you. But I put you in his crosshairs, and I'm sorry. Elena met his eyes, and the shame she felt was real. I became what I hated. Manipulative, strategic, willing to sacrifice people as pawns. My father would have been ashamed. Would he? Or would he have understood that sometimes you have to become a little bit ruthless to fight people who are ruthless all the way through? James set down his mug, and something in his expression shifted. Rebecca used to tell me that the hardest choices aren't between good and evil. They're between two goods that can't both exist. You could have been a perfect CEO who never took risks, never challenged the board, never fought back against corruption. But then Richard would still be stealing, and your father's killer would still be free. He leaned forward. I'm angry that you put me in danger, but I'm angrier at myself for thinking I was just hired for my competence. Nobody gets a $200,000 job without politics involved. I was naive, and that's on me. So what now? Now you tell me if you still want me at Apex. Not as a weapon, not as strategy, just as an engineer trying to build something that matters. Elena pulled a folder from her bag. Inside was a new contract. Terms that made the previous offer look like minimum wage. Vice President of Engineering, $300,000 annual salary, full equity stake, reporting directly to me. You'd oversee all medical device development, not just LifePulse. That's too much. That's what you're worth. The board approved it this afternoon, unanimously. But James, I need you to understand something. She pushed the contract across the table. I'm offering this because you've earned it. Because the LifePulse works. Because your design is saving lives in field tests. Because you're the kind of leader my father would have promoted. Not because I feel guilty. Not because I'm trying to buy your silence. You deserve this. James stared at the contract like it might bite him. My daughter asked me earlier if we won. I told her I didn't know what winning looked like anymore. Winning looks like your filtration system in 50 clinics by end of year. Winning looks like patients in rural Mississippi getting dialysis because you made a machine simple enough that anyone can use it. Winning looks like building something that outlasts all of us. He picked up the pen, and Elena held her breath. I'm not staying because of you. I'm staying because the work matters. Because kids like Emma need better medical devices, and I can help build them. Is that understood? Perfectly. He signed, and Elena felt something release in her chest. Not victory, but the possibility of redemption. 6 months later, Richard Thornton stood in federal court and heard the word guilty 15 times. Wire fraud, theft of trade secrets, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and 11 counts of embezzlement. The judge sentenced him to 15 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. His attorneys filed appeals that went nowhere. Meridian Biotech declared bankruptcy, its CEO indicted on related charges. Elena attended every day of the trial, sitting in the gallery where Richard could see her, bearing witness to the justice her father never got to see. On the day of sentencing, she walked out of the courthouse and drove directly to the cemetery. Daniel Mitchell's grave was simple granite in a section with old trees and quiet paths. Elena knelt in grass, still wet from morning rain. He's gone, Dad. 15 years. The FBI says they have enough evidence to charge him with your murder, but it might take another year to build the case. She traced her fingers over the engraved letters of his name. I became someone you wouldn't recognize fighting him. Strategic, manipulative, willing to use people as chess pieces. I almost lost myself trying to beat him at his own game. The wind moved through the trees, and Elena heard her father's voice in memory. The measure of a leader isn't perfection. It's learning when you've gone too far and choosing to step back. James taught me that. The mechanic I hired to be a weapon ended up being the person who reminded me what you stood for. He's VP of engineering now. The LifePulse is in 80 clinics. We're saving lives, Dad, just like you wanted. She stood, brushing grass from her knees. I hope that's enough. I hope you'd be proud, even of the parts that were ugly. Because I did what you asked. I sought justice, not revenge. It just took me a while to understand the difference. 2 years after Richard's conviction, Elena stood at a podium in the grand ballroom of the Palmer House Hilton, looking out at 400 faces representing the Medical Device Innovation Conference. James sat in the front row, and Riley sat beside him, 18 now, on break from her freshman year at Northwestern, where she'd started studying biomedical engineering.
My father, Daniel Mitchell, built Apex on a principle that seemed naive to many. That business could serve people and shareholders simultaneously.
That profit and purpose weren't enemies, but partners. Elena's hands were steady on the podium, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned every word.
When he died, I forgot that principle. I became obsessed with winning, with defeating the people who'd corrupted his company. I used strategy where I should have used integrity. I manipulated when I should have led with honesty. She looked directly at James. A mechanic from the South Side reminded me what leadership actually means. Not outsmarting your enemies, but building something so valuable they become irrelevant. Not winning at all costs, but winning in a way you can live with. The presentation behind her showed field data from LifePulse deployments, 83 clinics across 19 states, over 10,000 successful treatments, 0 equipment failures in 6 months. Real leadership isn't about being the smartest person in the room.
It's about hiring people smarter than you and giving them room to work. It's about admitting when you're wrong and learning from people you'd normally overlook. She clicked to a photo of James working with his engineering team, 30 people now, half of them hired from non-traditional backgrounds, all of them brilliant. James Carter was a mechanic. He was also a mechanical engineer who'd been laid off during downsizing, who'd spent 6 years fixing cars because that's what he had to do to feed his daughters. Corporate America had written him off. I almost did too. But his $15,000 filtration system is better than our $45,000 one. His practical engineering saved this project. His integrity saved me from becoming the kind of leader I despised. The applause started before she finished, but Elena kept talking. My father said the measure of a leader is who they build up, not who they tear down. I forgot that lesson. I won't forget it again. After the speech, James found her in the hallway outside the ballroom.
You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. You saved my life twice, once from the river, once from becoming my own worst enemy. Riley appeared, and Elena saw Rebecca in her features. The same sharp intelligence, the same uncompromising honesty. Miss Mitchell, I wanted to thank you for the internship offer. You earned it. Your research proposal on simplified dialysis interfaces was exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need. My dad helped. James put his arm around his daughter. You did that work yourself. I just pointed you in the right direction. That's what good mentors do. Elena smiled at them both, this family that had survived everything corporate warfare could throw at them and come out stronger. Speaking of which, we have a new engineer starting Monday. Single mother, laid off from a corporate job when she refused to falsify safety data. I'm putting her on your team, James.
Sounds perfect. 5 years after Richard's arrest, Elena sat in her office on a Wednesday afternoon, reviewing resumes. Apex had grown to 3,000 employees, the LifePulse in 200 clinics nationwide, 3 new medical devices in development. The company was profitable and principled, her father's dream made real through trial and error and the occasional willingness to admit when she was wrong. Her phone buzzed, James calling from the engineering floor. Got a minute? There's someone I want you to meet. In the 14th floor conference room, a young woman in her late 20s sat with a portfolio of designs that showed genuine talent and 0 corporate polish. Elena Mitchell, this is Amanda Torres. She was just laid off from Patterson Medical for refusing to sign off on a faulty ventilator design. Elena shook the woman's hand, saw the fear and hope in equal measure. Tell me about the ventilator. Amanda's voice gained strength as she explained the technical flaw, the pressure from management to approve it anyway, her decision to blow the whistle even knowing it would cost her job. That took courage. It took rent money. I'm 3 months behind and I have a 6-year-old daughter. Elena looked at James, saw him nod. How would you feel about redesigning our emergency ventilator? We've been stuck on the power supply issue for 8 months. Your portfolio shows you've solved similar problems. I don't have a fancy degree.
I learned engineering at community college while working full-time. James was a mechanic when I hired him. Now he's VP of engineering and the best hire I've ever made. Degrees are nice, but integrity and competence matter more. Amanda's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Elena recognized that particular brand of exhausted hope. When would I start? Monday.
Salary is $90,000. Full benefits, signing bonus to cover your back rent. If the ventilator redesign works, we'll talk about advancement. After Amanda left, James lingered in the doorway. Thank you for giving her a chance. I learned from the best. Elena pulled up the photo on her desk. Her father standing in front of the... She's finishing her thesis on portable medical devices for underserved communities. Tell her the job is hers. We need people who understand that technology is only as good as the lives it improves. That's what her mother used to say. Rebecca believed that healing was a calling, not a career. Then Rebecca raised a daughter who carries that forward. That's legacy, James. That's what matters when the quarterly reports are forgotten. After he left, Elena stood at her window and watched the city light up as evening fell. Somewhere out there, Richard sat in a federal prison, and Elena felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not revenge, just the quiet knowledge that justice had been served and her father could rest. Her phone rang. Margaret Bradshaw, calling with news that the board had approved Elena's proposal to donate $10 million to fund medical equipment for low-income clinics. Your father would approve? I hope so. That's all I've ever wanted, to prove that his way could work, that principle and profit could coexist. After the call ended, Elena sat in the dark office and let herself remember the woman she'd been 5 years ago. Angry, grieving, willing to use people as weapons in a war against corruption. That woman had won, but the victory had cost her something important, the ability to look in the mirror and see her father's values reflected back. James had given that back to her, not through grand gestures, but through quiet example. Showing up, doing the work, treating people with dignity even when the system treated them as disposable. He'd reminded her that real strength wasn't the ability to outmaneuver your enemies. It was the wisdom to build something so valuable that defeating your enemies became secondary to serving your purpose. Monday morning, Elena arrived at 7 to find Amanda Torres already at her desk, deep in CAD models of the ventilator design. By noon, she'd identified the power supply flaw. By end of week, she had a prototype that worked better and cost less than anything the previous team had developed. Elena promoted her to lead engineer after 3 months. James sent an email that just said, "Told you so." Elena replied, "Yes, you did. Thank you for teaching me to see what I was missing." His response came back immediately. "Thank you for being willing to learn. That's the difference between good leaders and great ones." She printed that email and put it in her desk drawer next to her father's photo. Some lessons were worth keeping close. Riley graduated Northwestern with honors and joined Apex as a junior engineer. Her first project was redesigning the LifePulse interface for elderly patients with limited dexterity. The update increased successful treatments by 12% and won an Industry Innovation Award. At the ceremony, your dad taught me that the people everyone else dismisses are often the ones with the most to offer. They've learned to make things work with limited resources. They understand that simplicity is sophistication. They know that the work matters more than the title. Is that why you keep hiring people from weird backgrounds? That's why I hire people who are brilliant and principled and hungry to prove themselves. The weird backgrounds are just proof they've survived systems that tried to break them. Riley smiled, and it was Rebecca's smile, fierce and hopeful and unafraid. I want to build what my mom would have wanted. Medical devices that actually help people instead of just making money for shareholders. Then you're in the right place. That's what we do here. 10 years after pulling Elena from the Chicago River, James stood in the same testing lab where he'd built his first LifePulse prototype. The device had evolved, smaller now, more efficient, deployed in 300 clinics across 23 states, over 50,000 successful treatments, lives saved that could be counted in spreadsheets and quarterly reports, but also in letters from patients who wrote to say thank you for making medicine accessible. Elena found him there at 6 in the evening, both of them working late in the way that had become routine. The FDA approved the pediatric ventilator. Amanda's design passed every test. She's brilliant. I knew it the moment I saw her portfolio. You have good instincts for finding overlooked talent. I was overlooked talent. I know what it looks like. Elena leaned against the workbench where they'd fought battles and built futures. My father used to say that the work we do outlives us, that the measure of success isn't what we accomplish, but what we enable others to accomplish. Rebecca said something similar. That healing was about creating conditions for people to save themselves, not about being the hero who does the saving. They would have liked each other. They would have changed the world together. Elena pulled out her phone, showed James the latest field report from Mississippi, the same clinic where they tested the first prototype, now serving 400 patients monthly with 0 equipment failures. We did change the world, just a small corner of it. That's all anyone can do. Change the part you can reach, then teach others to do the same. They stood in comfortable silence, two people who'd saved each other's lives and built something that would outlast them both. Outside the windows, Chicago glittered with evening lights, the city where they'd both learned that jumping into freezing water to save a stranger could lead to saving yourself. Elena's phone buzzed. Riley calling to say she'd just been promoted to senior engineer, her portable oxygen concentrator design approved for production. Tell her congratulations from me too. After Elena left, James stood alone in the testing lab and thought about Rebecca, about the promise he'd made at her bedside to give their daughters a future worth fighting for. That promise had led him to jump into a river, to accept a job he felt unqualified for, to fight battles he didn't understand, to build things that mattered more than paychecks. Riley had a career. Emma had graduated with a degree in public health and was working for a nonprofit bringing medical care to underserved communities. Both of them whole, both of them thriving, both of them carrying forward the lesson their mother had taught, that service was the highest calling, that love meant showing up, that integrity was the only currency that mattered. He'd kept his promise. That night, James drove home through familiar streets to the same brick bungalow on South Heritage Avenue. The porch had been fixed, the fence stood straight, but it was still home in the way that mattered. Rebecca's picture still sat on the mantel. Her perfume bottle still sat on the dresser, empty now, but kept as a reminder. He stood in the kitchen where he'd sat so many nights wondering how to make rent, how to afford groceries, how to be enough for two daughters who deserved better than exhausted desperation. The bills were paid now, the mortgage satisfied, the future secure in ways he'd stopped believing possible. But the real wealth wasn't in his bank account. It was in Riley's career, Emma's compassion, the 30 engineers he'd mentored who were building things that saved lives. It was in the knowledge that jumping into freezing water to save a stranger had led to saving himself, to learning that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was believe you deserved better and fight like hell for it. His phone buzzed. Elena sending a photo from her office, her father's picture next to a frame holding James's original Life Pulse sketch, the one he'd drawn on a napkin during their first technical discussion. The caption read, "The beginning. Thank you for reminding me what this was always supposed to be about." James typed back, "Thank you for giving a mechanic a chance to be an engineer again, and for teaching me that integrity and success aren't enemies." Her response came immediately. "We taught each other. That's what partnership means." He set down his phone and looked at Rebecca's picture, and he could almost hear her voice saying what she'd said 1,000 times. "You're stronger than you think, braver than you know, and worthy of every good thing that comes your way." 10 years ago, he'd jumped into a river to save a drowning woman. Tonight, He understood that she'd been drowning in grief and rage and the terrible burden of fighting alone, just as he'd been drowning in poverty and fear and the weight of being enough for two daughters who needed more than he thought he could give. They'd pulled each other to shore, and in doing so, had built something that would outlast them both. A company that valued people over profits, that turned overlooked talent into innovation, that proved her father's principle wasn't naive idealism, but the hardest kind of wisdom, knowing that real strength wasn't the ability to destroy, but the courage to build. The legacy continued, carried forward by Riley and Emma and Amanda and every person who'd been told they weren't good enough, weren't credentialed enough, weren't important enough to matter. They mattered at Apex. They built things that saved lives. They proved every day that the measure of a person wasn't where they started, but what they chose to build with the chances they were given. And that, James thought as he turned off the kitchen light and headed to bed, was victory enough for any lifetime.